Hello and welcome to India's World. Bangladesh has taken delivery of 2 Chinese submarines last week. This is part of Bangladesh's pursuit of modernization of its armed forces by procuring latest weapons and equipment. China is the largest supplier of weapons to Bangladesh. Since 2010, Beijing has supplied Dhaka with 5 maritime patrol vessels, 2 corvettes, 44 tanks and 16 fighter jets, as well as surface-to-air and anti-ship missiles. The 2 Ming-class submarines acquired by Dhaka may or may not pose an immediate threat to India, but they could eventually have a role in the larger game being played in the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean is key to the geopolitical rise of China. Its sea lines connect the Chinese economy to critical sources of energy in the Middle East and Africa. The extensive ties that China seeks with Bangladesh are aimed at increasing its influence in the Indian Ocean rim countries. After receiving the 2 submarines from China formally, Bangladesh Navy Chief Admiral Mohammad Nizamuddin Ahmed had an unusual meeting with General Shu Qiliang, Vice Chairman of China's Central Military Commission in Beijing. General Shu said that China appreciated Bangladesh's firm support in Taiwan, Xinjiang, Tibet and the South China Sea-related issues which concern China's core interests. He also said that China would continue to support the efforts of Bangladesh in safeguarding its sovereignty and territorial integrity. To discuss these statements and the significance of Bangladesh's building up undersea warfare capabilities, we have with us a distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, a formidable diplomat. He was Foreign Secretary of India and has served as India's ambassador to Turkey, Egypt, France and Russia. We have with us Ambassador Veena Sikri, a distinguished diplomat. She has been India's High Commissioner to Malaysia and Bangladesh. She was also India's Consul General in Hong Kong and the Director General of Indian Council for Cultural Relations. We have with us Commodore Uday Bhaskar, a strategic affairs expert and a noted columnist. He is Director, Society for Policy Studies, New Delhi. I welcome all of you to this discussion. Ambassador Sibal, let me begin with you. How should one see the acquisition of these 2 submarines by a friendly neighbor like Bangladesh? And this at a time when on our western border we have a Chinese proxy, Pakistan, and we also have China increasing its presence in Sri Lanka, Maldives, Seychelles and Mauritius.
Well, in itself, this doesn't pose much of a problem. Apparently, these are submarines which will be used for training purposes. And later on, Bangladesh may go in for more submarines. But this is the beginning of a strategic challenge that we must look in its entirety that China poses to us as part of its maritime Silk Route and its ingress into the Indian Ocean and obtaining footholds in key countries in our neighborhood. This evidently poses a major strategic challenge, and it is a bit surprising that Bangladesh under Sheikh Hasina should have gone in for this. But then, on the other hand, since China is the biggest supplier of armed equipment to Bangladesh, it fitted into the larger scheme of things that they should also acquire these submarines from China, whereas they could have got them from Russia. That would have posed much less of a problem for us because Russia has far better submarine technology than China
and
has.
They're more expensive.
Well, this only $203 million since they use submarines and this and that. True, that might be a factor. And finally, of course, one doesn't know why Bangladesh needs these submarines. Yeah. It doesn't serve any particular strategic purpose. It has solved all its maritime boundaries with neighboring countries.
That's the question I want to take to Ambassador Veena Sikri. Now, this is, there is no necessity for Bangladesh, as Ambassador Sibal says, to get submarines because who could you use them against? India and Myanmar? And both the maritime disputes with Myanmar as well as with India have been resolved in favor of Bangladesh.
You know, I must take you back a little bit on this and to see how China very deliberately is building up its relationships with India's neighbors. And wherever they see some a good progress in India's relationship, say with Bangladesh, as it has been since 2009, they immediately come in and give in. And also you do see in Bangladesh itself, there is a lot of talk that over the last 5 years, 6 years of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina being Prime Minister, there's been a gradual reinforcement of the pro-Chinese bureaucrats the pro-Chinese orientation of the bureaucracy in Bangladesh. There's a lot of talk of that in Bangladesh. Now let's see what China has been trying to do. In 2005, when Khaleda Zia was the Prime Minister, that's when they first came in and set up this comprehensive economic partnership with Bangladesh. In 2010, when Sheikh Hasina went to China, they then made it a closer comprehensive economic partnership. And now this time, when Xi Jinping was in Bangladesh very recently, on the way to Goa, for the BRICS summit, they've now made it a strategic partnership of cooperation. Now, this is a very interesting word. And the debate is this strategic partnership of cooperation only aimed at economic development, economic cooperation, or does it have a strategic value? For example, in Bangladesh, they will tell you, with China, we talk about defense cooperation. And with India, we talk about security cooperation. Because on counter-terror, it is with India they have the dialogue. But their armed forces, their navy, their air force is completely Chinese. I must tell you also about that, because the Bangladesh people themselves say China gives it to us at friendship prices, but when you want to replace, you want spare parts, they are double the price. So we cannibalize some parts of what we have bought to keep the equipment going. Now, India has to counter that by stepping
we're going to discuss that. But let's stick to the submarines for the time being. Now, experts claim that submarines at best serve the purpose of maintaining a deterrent posture. Now, deterrence against whom? Training on submarines against whom? That is the question. Now, you could say that in Begum Khaleda Zia's time, when India was seen as a potential threat, and Bangladesh thought of a deterrent posture. But all this is happening under the friendly government of Sheikh Hasina.
I would say that as far as the submarine is concerned as a platform, all the received wisdom on the subject is that it is used for sea denial. In as much as, very broadly, we talk about aircraft carriers for sea control. But this question about why should a country like Bangladesh, given its geography, given its politics, invest in submarines, I think it's not a question that we can ask in Delhi. Meaning that every country in the world, particularly if you look at ASEAN, the trend, I would say, as an analyst, is that many developing countries are now investing in their navies, depending on how much money they can bring to the table and what kind of partnerships are in the pipeline. Bangladesh, China is a good example. And within that modernization or acquisition, you'll find that today the underwater platform is being prioritized by a number of countries. You can just look at ASEAN, and Bangladesh is a good example. Even Myanmar, incidentally, is looking for submarines. So to that extent, let me play devil's advocate and say that Bangladesh's investment in the submarine is rational. It is a justifiable choice. And if you want to extend the argument
from
further...
Bangladeshi perspective.
From Bangladeshi
So we are not bothered about that. It's a sovereign country.
We should not sit here and say why submarines for them. That's not a fair question.
No, they can do whatever they like as a sovereign country. But what we can ask is, try and understand why our friendly neighbor is doing this.
So I'm giving you the logic. One is that this is the general trend. The second is Bangladesh is a country which is heavily dependent on exports. If all their projections are right, they are looking at $60 billion worth of trade. And they repeatedly say that any country, there is no threat, by the way, but most countries will rationalize their navies saying that we need to protect trade. But I agree with this point, there is no tangible threat. But I think Veena's point is very valid. The real, I would say, embedded strategic dimension is China has a very, very good reason to enable both Bangladesh and Pakistan, of course, is a well-known case, and increase its footprint as far as the Indian Ocean littoral is concerned.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to discuss this further. We're going to discuss this further in a bit. I'll come to you, but we need to take a break at this point. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing Sino-Bangladeshi strategic ties in the wake of Bangladesh acquiring 2 Chinese Ming-class submarines. Mr. Sibal, what kind of role would Chinese personnel play in building the infrastructure for these submarines? You would need berthing facilities, repair facilities, battery charging facilities, deployment, because you'll need trainers. So Chinese trainers and submariners would be on these submarines initially, training Bangladeshi crew. So doesn't all this mean that Chinese Navy's presence in the Bay of Bengal now is going to be there in the short and the medium term at least?
Yes, of course. And it's part of a larger design. China is selling 6 submarines to Pakistan. They're building the Gwadar port. In Bangladesh, we wanted to build this Sonadia port, but that has been shelved for the time being. Now, this will give them a foothold. in Bangladesh. Their personnel will be present, and all the other things you mentioned, they will be servicing. So it will be a permanent presence. Also, it blocks out India. Now, if they've come in and they are the biggest supplier of arms to Bangladesh and also supplying submarines, this means that there is no scope, even if India revised its policies, of entering into some kind of defense supply arrangement with Bangladesh. And then the Chinese submarines have also landed up in Colombo. But the other thing, of course, is that in any country, the armed forces tend to be a power by itself. And Bangladesh has had military coups and this and that. And as for China to cultivate the Bangladesh military, actually is intended also to have a lobby within Bangladesh which would prevent a much closer relationship between India and Bangladesh, and in a sense that they will always be strategic players in Bangladesh in terms of India's role in South Asia and its relationship with its neighbors. So it's a problem for us.
Okay. Commodore Uday Bhaskar, can we rule out the future deployment of these submarines in the vicinity of sensitive establishments of India due to their proximity to Bangladesh naval bases? I'm told they are within 500 nautical miles of each other. How worried should India be because of this? Because you would have tactical intelligence gathering not only about merchant shipping but also about naval shipping by China.
India should be monitoring like any professional service would do. The moment you have submarines in your vicinity, it would be, I would say, very appropriate if you ensure that you are able to get into the kind of surveillance that is required. Because it doesn't matter, the nature of the political relationship, I would say, is at a different level. Professionally, the moment there is a submarine, friendly or otherwise, its presence, the way it is being deployed, would be part of the, shall we say, tasking for the Indian surveillance system.
I mean the Chinese presence on these submarines and...
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, very important. Even in the training phase, I'm saying that the deployment patterns also, now hypothetically, as Ambassador Sibal said, we now have Chinese platforms coming into the Indian Ocean. They'll come to Colombo, they can come to Bangladesh. If I was a Chinese admiral, I'd bring a Chinese Ming into the Indian Ocean for exercises with the Bangladeshi Navy. It would cause, shall we say, a certain amount of a challenge for India in trying to keep an eye on this kind of activity.
Okay. Ambassador Sikri, Ambassador Sibal hinted at it. Hasn't Bangladesh of late been changing tack on China strategically? For example, the Sonadia deep sea port. 2014, Sheikh Hasina went to Beijing, did not sign the agreement. She was expected to sign it. Japan has been given the contract for a deep sea port next to Sonadia at Matabari, I think it's called. Similarly, the Chinese were supposed to build another port at Paira. That contract, instead of giving to the Chinese, they've given it to the Dutch. So is politically Bangladesh changing tack?
I think Bangladesh is sensitive to India's concerns. Bangladesh under Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has shown this sensitivity, and the two examples you mentioned are exactly very relevant because there was great concern when Khaleda Zia was Prime Minister. She was all set to give the deep sea port to China. So I think this is a good thing that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is showing the sensitivity. I think our talks should extend with the Prime Minister on the question of submarines as well, because when a quantum change has happened in this way, as we have seen, the next thing will be submarine exercises between Bangladesh and China, which certainly will not be in India's interest. So we have to take up this issue very clearly. Actually, I'm surprised because India had very good relations with the Bangladesh Navy. And even though when the relations with the Bangladesh Army were very difficult, as long as the Prime Minister was Khaleda Zia, but with the Navy and the Air Force, it was really good. So I don't know how this has suddenly been changed, this quantum leap, how has it suddenly happened and how we did not forecast it. But we need to take it up very seriously.
Okay.
But I just wanted to add something which in your introduction you mentioned, the meeting between the Bangladesh Admiral and the Chinese. Yeah. The Chinese have put the relationship in a larger strategic context by mentioning all the things
I'm going to come to that. Okay. But before that, let me ask you about something that you hinted at earlier. Is there an apprehension in your mind, at least, I don't know whether there is in Government of India's mind, that forget the deep sea port, that Chittagong port where the Chinese are involved could become Gwadar East?
I think that will be far too risky for Bangladesh and its relationship with India to give that much access to China, Chittagong right next to Calcutta and our eastern seaboard. That would be a very major challenge that Bangladesh would present to India. And I don't think they will have the political stomach to do that. And this would also actually mean that our relationship with China would have deteriorated to a point. actually it is becoming more tense to a point where the Chinese are totally disregarding Indian sensitivities and are willing to increase their presence and augment their strategic encirclement of India. I don't think that this is going to happen in the short term.
No, I think Chittagong port, China did build the jetty, but it stopped at that. So at the moment, China's presence in Chittagong port, they just built the jetty and left. So the control of the port, the control of the trade processes is not there with China at the moment. But I think we have to also bring in this question when we talk to Bangladesh and otherwise also of the Bangladesh-Pakistan relationship. Now we know that the China-Pakistan relationship, all-weather, strategic, etc. But the Bangladesh-Pakistan relationship has significantly deteriorated in the last 1 year. In fact, there's a lot of talk, you know, even the way Sheikh Hasina supported the cancellation of the SAARC summit and so on. I think Pakistan is going to China and telling them, get Bangladesh in your, you know, direct control so that the friendship with India and Bangladesh cannot rise. This is an aspect that we have to look at very carefully because, as you see, the Russia-Pakistan relationship, how did it suddenly start improving? Again, pressure from Pakistan on China. So this whole working in tandem between Pakistan and China with India's traditional friends, whether it is Bangladesh and so on, I think we have to bring to Bangladesh's concern that China can never help them on the terrorism issue.
Okay.
The way Pakistan is behaving on you know, all these Mas'ud Azhars, etc., that has to come in. Very big concern.
Okay, but let me just ask you this question, if you could answer it quickly. Do you think China can increase its influence on Bangladesh through the Navy? Because they've bought 2 corvettes already, maybe they're buying more, 2 submarines already. It would make no sense to sort of change the platform and go for a new platform, which would be more expensive.
The Bangladesh Navy, Chinese influence can only be up to a limited extent. Meaning, if you look at the military structure in Bangladesh, like in India, the army is the lead service. So the suggestion that they would be investing in the Navy so that they could in any way shape the military opinion in Bangladesh, I think would be a bit of a stretch.
Okay, we need to take a break at this point again. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing Sino-Bangladeshi strategic ties in the wake of Bangladesh acquiring 2 Chinese submarines. Ambassador Sibal, you had referred earlier to the meeting between Bangladesh Navy Chief and Vice Chairman of the Central Military Commission of China, where General Shu said that they discussed Xinjiang and Tibet and Bangladesh's firm support on these issues. Isn't this something new and inexplicable?
Well, firstly, as I said earlier, the Chinese have deliberately placed it in a larger strategic context because India's position, let's say on the South China Sea, is quite different from that of presumably Bangladesh and others. But I think there's also a hint there and a warning there that Bangladesh is expected to continue to support China's core interests in Xinjiang, Tibet, Taiwan, and the South China Sea as part of this strengthening of defense ties. So there's a message in it also.
And Bangladesh is letting China say all this and get away with it?
Yes, because these are not strictly bilateral issues between India and Bangladesh. So Bangladesh is free to take this position. There's no compulsion on them to align their foreign policy on such issues, external issues, with India's policies. But yes, it creates a gap in terms of the position that countries in Southeast Asia and South Asia and who are very friendly to India, like Bangladesh now, take on issues relating to China's so-called core interess, given the problems between India and China and the threat that we see from China. So all that is a mix. And if Bangladesh takes this kind of a position, it does show a gap in terms of our external perceptions.
Sikri, what do you think General Shu meant when he said China will continue to support the efforts Bangladesh has made in safeguarding its sovereignty and territorial integrity? What are these threats to Bangladesh's territorial integrity or sovereignty for which it needs Chinese support?
You know, this is a very dangerous statement because we must remember that China never supported Bangladesh war of liberation.
Didn't recognize it till 1975?
Yes, in fact, even after the war of liberation, they never supported Sheikh Mujib. Sheikh Hasina's father, Sheikh Mujib, they never supported him. The day he was murdered and Pakistan recognized Bangladesh, then the whole thing started. I think this has to be brought back to Bangladesh's fore of attention. Now, after that happened, after 1975, when they had 2 military dictators, Zia-ur Rahman and Ershad, the Chinese army came in full force. And they actually, as part of the training that the Bangladesh army was given, the enemy territory was India. So they were all the Bangladesh Army, Navy, Air Force were Foxland. That's India. So whatever you're trained on is to protect your sovereignty, as every army and Navy and Air Force does. Who is the enemy? India. Because Bangladesh is surrounded on three sides by India. So this mentioning of this phrase is harking back to those days where they're reminding Bangladesh, remember, who is your enemy? Your enemy is India. So be careful. So big bad wolf. Now this is a very, they're trying to tell the defense forces, retrain the defense forces, because since Sheikh Hasina is coming back, since I would say even since the army-backed caretaker government, India's relationship with the Bangladesh army has grown by leap and bounds. We have a very friendly relationship, positive relationship. It is expected that when Sheikh Hasina comes next time to India, she will even honor the soldiers who gave up their lives in the Bangladesh Liberation War, the martyrs. So it's a tremendous growing area of positive cooperation. China wants to combat it completely. India has to be very careful on this and remind Bangladesh.
So how is it, Commodore Uday Bhaskar, that okay, India is no longer Foxland, no longer the big bad wolf, because the Bangladesh army's wargaming doesn't have Foxland any longer. Okay, it's gone. Now, if that is gone, why has this statement of General Shoo not been contested by anybody in Bangladesh? Not one person has said that, look, what is this man saying? This is not the nature of our relationship. Or do you think diplomatically it is not proper to contest these things?
I imagine that at the moment it is a subaltern relationship, meaning Bangladesh is receiving a lot of assistance, aid across the board, including the investment that President Xi had promised on his most recent visit. So my sense is that I think the intriguing part is, why did they allow the statement to be made? And also the Chinese, by the way, are very good at this. They make a statement, they immediately put it out if it's in their favor, whether it has to do with Tibet or South China Sea or what they did with Philippines. I think Bangladesh, perhaps, in quiet diplomacy, India would also have to check with its counterparts in Bangladesh as to why this was allowed. And a last point, Bharat, I would say that, we should monitor this very carefully, but I think we should not be seen to be in any way being critical of Bangladesh in public, because that would be counterproductive. Because as I said at the very outset, these are sovereign decisions, whether you want to get submarines or not. How you deploy those submarines and how that affects us.
But why doesn't India have the sovereign right to say that we are unhappy with what's happening in our neighborhood?
No, it could be done separately. It requires quiet diplomacy.
Of course.
That's the only point.
Okay. Sibal, Sino-Indian ties are marked both by competition as well as cooperation, and there are ups and downs. Do you think there are institutions in Bangladesh which take advantage of these ups and downs?
Not only Bangladesh, all our neighbors do that. And this is where our dilemma is. If our relationship with China improves, this gives less space to our neighbors to play the China card against us. If the relationship is allowed to deteriorate, then they can play the China card more effectively against us. But we have real problems with China, and we can't determine our policy towards China taking into consideration how the neighbors will play the China card. This is a problem we've been living with for several decades and will continue. And with China's aggressive policies in our neighborhood, with their ambitious plans, naval plans to come into the Indian Ocean and all the maritime Silk Route, etc., projects that they have in mind. In fact, until our border issues resolved and we have normal relations with China, the China factor will be a huge, huge strategic problem for us in the years ahead.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I want to say that, China has been jostling for power in India's neighborhood for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think that India has to plan a strategic response. One is, of course, talk to Bangladesh, other is talk to China, but also on the people-to-people level. Because between China and Bangladesh, there's hardly any people-to-people relationship. It's just this strategic relationship, government to government. You talk to ministers, you get ministers into your pocket, you have deep pockets, you can pay them out and so on. Whereas with India and Bangladesh right now, we are building up a very strong relationship, academia, young students, where you actually convince the people that it's not in your interest to have this kind of relationship with China. At the moment, I think the people of China, the people of Bangladesh, they're torn, because if you see the comments in the Bangladesh media, there are a lot of them supporting China, so they don't know what they should think about it.
Okay, last question. We're really run out of time. Commodore, is there enough space for India's and China's strategic interests to cohabit in Bangladesh? That both can pursue their strategic interests there, or do you think there'll be
that's
a
highly
competition?
desirable, but I think the politics between India and China now limit the degree to which I think we could have a cooperative relationship in Bangladesh. But a quick last word, I think India should invest in military diplomacy with Bangladesh in a far more focused manner than what we have done.
Very quickly, China says that India has no business in the South China Sea because you're an outsider. Right? The same logic then should apply to China's ingress into our neighborhood. That you are an outside power here. So what you said is there cannot be cohabitation unless China accepts our
no, but hang on, if
increasing
Bangladesh
presence.
invites China, that won't be similar to South China Sea, isn't it?
You know, China tries to project it as though it's a zero-sum game. But we have to rise above that and tell the people of Bangladesh that, look, your interests rise with India, don't make it a zero-sum game.
No, I think what she's saying is right, but this will be a long haul.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, even with regard to Pakistan and China, the people-to-people level, there is no relationship.
Yeah.
There's no relationship, but look at the very strong strategic relationship between the two countries.
Yeah.
So I think people, yes, it's important to keep doing that, but I think at the end of the day, it's the governments and the political forces and the armed forces and others who have to determine what the direction of the policy of a country should be towards a neighbor.
Okay. She doesn't agree, but we've run out of time. I'd like to thank all of you. Commodore Uday Bhaskar, Ambassador Veena Sikri, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, thank you for participating in this discussion. That is all we have for you today. We'll be back again as usual next week. Until then, goodbye and thanks for joining us on India's World.